Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Gary, how you doing out there?
Good, John. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Good.
Yeah.
So I think once upon a time I mentioned on the show that I'd once owned a Saturn, and the reason I bought the Saturn just purely because it was a plastic car, and I thought that was such a cool, innovative idea at the time. And then as someone like you would tell me, would be that Ford had developed a plastic car long before that. And it turns out that today, 79 years ago, was when Ford introduced its soybean car. And there was that classic picture of Henry Ford with the axe taking a whack to the thing.
Yeah.
Remember, it was just
I remember the photo. I mean, I don't remember when it happened. That was before my day. Yeah.
I'm just saying, but
right.
So yeah, technology sometimes bursts forward, goes away, comes back, goes away.
Yeah,
So
well, as you know, Henry was a big advocate of soybeans. Mm-hmm. He drank soy milk. He ate soy ice cream, and the plastic you're talking about was made from soy resin.
Right. So it was basically Saturn-like in the fact that there was a tubular steel structure, and then there were 14 panels that were made out of the soy plastic put on it. So the vehicle weighed about 1,000 pounds less than a contemporary car of the era back then. And,
man, that's a lot of light weighting.
But just think about the gauge of the steel they're using back then.
Right. You know, he also looked at having, I think I've got this story right. He looked at having license plates made out of that plastic. And so the story goes, maybe the urban legend, maybe the myth, that goats started eating the license plates. And that was that idea.
Well, moving right along.
Yeah. Right. Hey, we got to let everybody know who else we've got here, right?
Absolutely.
Todd Lassa.
John McElroy.
Todd, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Hey, I heard you're moving, or you did move.
Welcome to Western Maryland.
You're such a Democrat. You had to be right there with Biden, huh?
That's a Democrat with a lowercase d. Mm-hmm. I've been no party since 1980 something. So
what prompted the move to Maryland?
Oh, a number of things. Partially for our dogs, partially because Donna and I were both working from home anyway. It's closer to where a lot of her cases are, and other future stuff.
And plus, we get to see his garage, and we get to see his Miata there, and
my Scuderia.
Yes. And so we didn't see that before, so that's a good thing.
That's I believe between the NC Miata, the 1980 Mazda RX-7, which my dad bought when it was brand new, and the Bug-Eye Sprite, I've got a combined 319 horsepower right there.
That's great. Well, cool. Great to have you on the show today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And hey, we've got some SEMA people we got to bring in here. Where's John Warniak?
Hey,
all right, John.
Hey, Johnny, how you doing? How you doing, Gary? Hey, Tom.
Yeah,
good.
John.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having us out here virtually. This is awesome. As Gary said earlier during the pre-show, we could possibly have a virtual beer.
Yeah. That'd be great. So, John, we're going to divide the show into two segments. We want to talk all about how you can modify cars and still be able to adjust all the ADAS sensors and all that properly. Who else do you have with you for this segment?
So we got a pretty killer lineup today. I think we're going to go through it pretty quickly. First 15 minutes will be myself and my colleague, Michael McSweeney, General Manager, President of SCA Fox Factory. And then we're going to switch over to Jake Rodenroth, who's been on your program before, from Aztec for the sensor recalibration. And then Alex Leibarger from TRC, Transportation Research Center down in Ohio about the great testing program we started about a year ago. So here we are on your program now talking about literally the first aftermarket vehicle, modified vehicle we know of, that's gone through the active safety testing protocols down at TRC for automatic emergency braking, particularly pedestrian automatic.
Cool. Well, let's get Mike in here. Mike, come on in.
Hey guys.
There you
Hey,
are. All right.
Good to be with y'all.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to start this out by reading a quote that you guys wrote in a paper that you wrote about this ADAS and modification of things, and I didn't know this. It says, "It is important to know that it is illegal to sell or install a product that takes a vehicle out of compliance with a Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, or FMVSS. Lift kits and larger, heavier wheels and tires can reduce the effectiveness of an ESC system. Assessing for compliance with FMVSS 126 after modifying a vehicle can provide peace of mind that the vehicle remains in compliance with the law." So if somebody changes their vehicle, they are out of compliance with the law?
For Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, as you said, that is an actual quote from our Washington, D.C. office, SEMA, Stuart Goswine, great colleague. Those are his exact words, so thank you for quoting that because it is legal. You cannot knowingly take a vehicle out of compliance, and particularly with electronic stability control, FMVSS 126 is the test to demonstrate that the vehicle is in compliance with electronic stability control.
So
The
this is why you
OEMs
guys did this study?
Well, that's just one of the tests. The other, FMVSS was kind of the tip of the iceberg. This is really getting down to much more complicated ADAS systems with sensors, cameras, etc. But the 126 test, that was rolled in by the OEMs over 4 years, 2008 to 2011. The aftermarket had 1 more year to comply and demonstrate that aftermarket modified vehicles would comply with FMVSS 126 as well. And Michael's been part of that ever since they started modifying the vehicles, particularly through bailment with the automakers, where he supplies well over 1,000 customized vehicles a month to the automakers.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you tell us about what your involvement in all this is?
Yeah, so our company is a division of Fox Factory, and we have unique bailment pool relationships with General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and Nissan. So we're getting vehicles directly from their manufacturing plants, upfitting them into some type of specialty vehicle, mainly off-road style trucks. So lift kits, shock upgrades, bigger wheels and tires. And then we sell those vehicles to new car franchise dealers. So the work that we're doing to the vehicles is actually done on a pre-title vehicle before the consumer actually even owns it. So it's super important to us to make sure that when we get the vehicle from the manufacturer, that once we modify it, not only does it meet the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, but it performs just as good as it did in a non-modified state. Mm-hmm. So like John said, it's almost essential to our business model to, as these new advanced driver assistance technologies come out, we adapt our upfits and our process to those technologies, because we really have to. And so it's important to the insurance companies that's insuring our drivers, to the drivers themselves and their families that they're putting in the vehicles, and our OEM relationships. So just like the industry adapt to FMVSS 126 and electronic stability control, 10 years ago, this is just the next thing that we've got to adapt to as an industry.
Yep. And
So do you guys at Fox have to figure out how to do all this? Are you getting help from the automakers, or how does that all work?
Yeah, it's kind of an arm's length thing. We're not getting a ton of support from the OEMs. It's really our modification, so it's our responsibility. So when we started learning of this new topic, my first call was to John, and it was cold call. John and I didn't know each other 2 years ago, right. And I said, "Hey, who in the industry should I call to try to figure this out?" And so John was my first call. And over the last year, we've really developed a nice collaboration between the industry experts like Aztec and Opus, ETI, and John's really spearheaded that. So it's really essential to our business. So we couldn't be more grateful for John and SEMA and their leadership on this topic.
Cool. See, John, now I know why you had these guys all on.
Yeah.
All right. So,
All they're going to do is say nice things about you.
yeah.
There are other authors that we did not invite for that.
Yeah.
But Gary, you brought up a good point. The 126. A lot of these ADAS technologies are not regulated yet. So people like Michael and 4 Wheel Parts and AEV, American Expedition Vehicles, they're getting out in front of it. So they're actually demonstrating what we call functional safety compliance. Does the vehicle work the way it was intended to from the factory? Just as Michael said. So even though there's not a regulation yet from the feds, you still need to make sure that the vehicle operates the way it came from the factory. So that's what a lot of these great SEMA companies are doing.
All right. So let's just use an example here. So many cars have sensors that are put into the front fascia, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so these are all calibrated. Now Mike, you put a lift kit on. So what used to be down here is now up here. Is that something you have to accommodate for?
Absolutely, and that's one of the main modifications that matters the most is the change in rod height, because the cameras, the radar systems, the distance sensors, they're not in their original locations. So we have to essentially recalibrate the vehicle to tell it it's not at the same rod height anymore. So there's a lot of fundamental calibrations that are important because the ADAS systems, the technology that's in the vehicles, it really works as a big network. All getting information about how fast is the vehicle going, what's the distance, what's the angle, the angle of the vehicle. So some fundamental calibrations that we do to start with is just the simple stuff that we have to do already, because the new technologies won't work if those things aren't calibrated, like changing the tire size to make sure that the odometer and the speedometer is correct. We want to make sure there's a correct speed rating, making sure the vehicle's aligned, going through FMVSS 135 to make sure that with the bigger tires and wheels, it still has the stopping power that it needs. So once we get those fundamental calibrations out of the way, we can then start thinking about recalibrating the cameras and the radars and really the advanced technologies that come to make up the ADAS systems.
So Michael, Fox, correct me if I'm wrong, you supply basically as an OEM supplier to, say, Ford and Jeep for certain models, like the Ford Raptor, I think uses Fox shocks, and maybe one or two.
Oh, you're breaking up there.
At Jeep and Ram, that Jeep and Ram are running, and then you have and I think some aftermarket parts for Ford. That's all heating up with the new Ford Bronco coming online. Do you do the pre-testing for everything? Whether it's whether obviously you do it for the original equipment that goes into special models like the Raptor, but what about if Mopar or Ford includes some of your parts for a lift kit? Do you do that ahead of time? Is that how you get into their aftermarket lineup?
Yeah, so whether we go in through the OEM channel or whether we're applying our parts to the vehicle in an aftermarket way, either pathway's got to have testing. And obviously on the OEM side of things, there's a lot of collaboration between Fox and the OEM as a new product's coming out. From an aftermarket standpoint, there's less of an interaction, but we still go through all the same testing and validation, just as if it was an original equipment vehicle, even though it's a modified vehicle. So yeah, either pathway that our parts wind up on a vehicle, we still go through the same testing and validation to make sure it performs well and it's a safe vehicle.
Michael, is that then covered with the OEM warranty, or do you have to provide some sort of warranty?
Yeah, so our vehicles that we upfit through the Belmont relationship maintain the factory warranty, but any part that we install after the original invoice that wouldn't be included on the original equipment Monroney sticker, for example, Fox Factory provides the warranty support for that and any part that may fail because of a part that we install. So any vehicle that we produce and deliver to a dealer is fully warranted to the customer.
Gotcha. And John, real quick then, you're getting a lot of people joining up, SEMA members that are signing up for this?
Well, yeah, we've currently got probably 200, probably 25 key manufacturers, SEMA manufacturers, that do the testing. Well over 150 FMVSS 126 tests have been conducted. And you'll hear about, again, taking it to the next level with the active safety. 126 has been around for about 10 years, as Michael said. But these new systems, boy, they're a lot more complicated. There's a lot more systems interaction. You've got cameras, you've got radars, you've got LiDAR in some cases, ultrasonic. You got to see, think, and act in real time. And these sensors all have to talk to one another through software. And, just simple putting a wrap over a sensor or blocking it or raising it, as Mike said, the line of sight, like Gary said, all that has to be in back-end compliance, functional compliance, to make these systems work the way they were intended to.
Yeah. Hey, look, we ought to get the other two that you brought along for us to talk to into the program. Why don't we say goodbye to you guys for now and bring the next two in?
Okay. Thanks, John. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks. Hi there, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right. So Jake, I see that you have these things behind you. They must have some meaning. So tell us what they are and what you guys do.
Yeah, we're here for the eye test. Are you guys ready?
Okay.
What you're looking at behind me here is actually the camera target for Nissan vehicles. So the camera mounted in the windshield that is constantly monitoring the lane and the markings on the road and vehicles, and on some of their models, even pedestrians. To my right here, this big domino behind me is actually the Honda lane watch target. So that little camera that's in the Honda vehicles that's only on the passenger side, and it's only for that mirror. It stands about 3 feet tall and is actually calibrated through the radio. And so that's Honda has gone back to our radar system, but that's a target that's required for mirror removal or replacement. And then you've got a couple of radar targets right here. The black one is a Toyota target, and the silver one is a Hyundai target. So it kind of gives you an idea. There's no standardization across brands. So
now are these targets for modified vehicles or for vehicles that are just conventional?
Yeah, these are for bone stock vehicles. So I've also got the brand new 2020 Titan back there, which is their first truck to have ADAS standard. And you see that board in front of it is the Intelligent Cruise Control calibration board. And so to Michael's point, as you mentioned before, there's a lot of prep that goes into prepping the vehicle for calibration, even when it's bone stock.
Let's hear from the TRC. What are you guys doing with all this?
Yeah, so as TRC, we've been around for 45 years doing all the type of testing that John's talked about for industry clients, government, academia, and getting into the research side of the game, especially with these automated and connected vehicle technologies coming out nowadays. So that's where my group is really getting involved with SEMA, where I'm part of the Advanced Mobility Division. And we've been involved in these conversations with SEMA for a couple years, as John was saying. And so what we do is we run these tests for those clients, those industry clients that match up exactly to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, new car assessment programs, or the IHS, as we're going to talk about with the Titan. We ran through a pedestrian AEB test. So we run these tests for clients that can then turn around and submit these for self-certification is what's needed. John kind of already mentioned that these active safety systems are not part of the FMVSS standards yet. So these are self-certification. It's not a requirement, but it really shows a customer that when they purchase a vehicle that has a Top Safety Pick Plus or a 5-star rating, that they're getting the safest vehicle that they can.
So you mentioned AEB, so that's automatic emergency braking. So basically, yes. The TRC is a giant track, and on this track you have like crash test dummies walking across and see if the Titan will run it over? Or
In some sense, yes. So
it's the technical explanation.
Yeah, we have 4,500 acres for our facilities. We have many different shapes and sizes of asphalt and concrete surfaces that we run these tests on. And so specifically for this testing, we have articulating strikeable targets where these are pedestrians and children size targets that have their legs move, and then we have a robotic platform that moves them across the path of the vehicle. And the main thing the word I want to highlight there is I use the term strikeable. So these are made out of foam that when hit by a truck or a passenger vehicle, that they kind of break apart but are easily put back together and reassembled. But to the vehicle, they look, just from the radar standpoint, from the vision standpoint, and any other sensor that would want to see the target, it looks as if it's a normal, real pedestrian.
Jake, how did you figure out how to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Todd.
Sure. Is there any expectation for some of these systems, these ADAS systems, being added to FMVSS? I'm thinking of how there's now a backup camera standard that I think is FMVSS that just came online in 19 or 20 model years. So what about some of these other systems?
Yeah, I believe that's 111, I think is what you're talking about. Yeah, so that's kind of the first one as we're kind of moving forward. We haven't seen any indication that it's going to happen, and but we are prepared. And something we talk about in the white paper is that there's a memorandum of understanding through many of the OEMs in the United States that they're going to have these systems standard by 2022. And so as these start to roll out, everybody's prepared for when these become actual standards and part of that. But as of right now, I haven't seen any plan.
Jake, how did you figure out how to test all these modified vehicles? And same question I had posed in the first segment. Did you have to work with OEMs? Were there other tier one suppliers who make these things? Or how did you come up with these?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. You know, to answer the question, we work directly with OEs on their aftermarket division, because they know that the vehicles are going to have accessories added to them. You know, you think about trim level differences, right? Where the base truck may have an 18-inch wheel and the highly trimmed one will have a 20-inch wheel. You have calibration associated with that, right? So in FCA's case, we actually take a measurement from the top of the tire to the bottom of the fender and enter that value into the scan tool, and then the vehicle learns, right? So, you know, kind of like what the targets shown behind me, there's no standardized process or target for all vehicles, all makes, all models. And so it's really a tremendous undertaking. I'm fortunate to be involved with it with SEMA and groups like Alex and Michael, to where we're working with the people that actually build the products and hopefully create something that is safe and continue to, you know, people want to modify their cars. I'm one of those guys. So it's something that we hope it will be safe to do so with these new technologies.
Jake,
go ahead, Gary.
Well, I was going to say, so Jake, when the Titan that you have behind you and you have that target in front of it. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that a lift kit was put on that stock vehicle and the vehicle is higher. So wouldn't you just lift the target up?
Well, you got to be careful, right? Because the car that's driving in front of the Titan is not lifted, right? So you don't want it picking up the roof of the car and not the back of the bumper, right? You can kind of see it right here. You can see the ramps here. We actually use those for the lower Nissans. So think of the Sentras, the Altimas that are lower to the ground than a Rogue or a Titan, right? Or you use an alignment rack. And what we're simulating is an alignment rack, the measurement. And so they perform the four-wheel alignment, and they set the car. The radar is lower on those cars than it is on the Rogue and Titan. So so that it works with the calibration board behind me. We have to make sure those vehicles are at a certain height.
So Jake, on a product like the Nissan Titan, how many variations are there potentially? Is it just a lift kit that you have to check, or a couple of different heights on different lift kits, or are there many other could this potentially be dozens of aftermarket?
Yeah, it's not just lift kits. It's brush guards, it's bug shields, it's potentially window tint that's dark. Those kinds of things create a challenge. And if you're doing anything with lighting, some of the OEMs like Ford, for instance, put their radar in the taillight itself. It's known in the industry as the $800 taillight. But it's one of those things that, when you modify that stuff, you have to understand how the system works, and not all radars require a calibration target. So the Nissan in particular, the blind spot radar does not require a target. It requires a scan tool to calibrate it, but not a target. Where if you did a Tundra, that's a different animal. That one requires a target. So it's different. Even within the same OEM, it's different model by model. And so, I printed this prior to. Here are the repair procedures for the Titan, okay? So as you can see, just to prep this car, I've got 6 pages of reading to do on this one and 9 pages of reading to do on this one. And, I've been a technician most of my life. And when I work with technicians, I ask them how much they read this stuff. And it's like, we don't have time for that, So it's a big challenge. And I think that we all as technicians have to study and stay current. And by the way, electric vehicles are next. So it's not going to get easier, So.
Alex, I'm wondering, do you have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration peeking over your shoulder, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety? I mean, are they aware of the kinds of tests that you're doing and the modifications?
Yeah, maybe not aware of the specific tests, and hopefully this is how we actually get that out there, that we are doing this type of research and this type of work. But TRC actually houses the Vehicle Research and Test Center for NHTSA, which is their only off-site government lab on a proving ground. So a lot of these new car assessment programs and procedures that are developed, they're proven out on TRC's grounds. And so we actually have some members from that team on our test team and actually led this testing. So we really stay close to the industry and government standards as they start to roll out.
So, Alex, I was a little interested. So you said you're in the advanced mobility group. And when I think of the advanced mobility group, I think of futuristic cars. Mm-hmm. So what's the advanced part?
Yeah, so really our bread and butter's in automation and connectivity, where we get into the automated driving systems, where those are your higher level, if you're familiar with the SAE levels, where we're talking about some that have human operators, but they're not responsible for the main driving task, or even getting to your level 4 and level 5, where there doesn't even need to be any steering wheel or pedals in a vehicle. So we've gotten to the point where we're evaluating those higher level systems without drivers, or your remote operated systems even. And then even from a connectivity side, so everybody's maybe heard of the vehicle to everything communication, where this is where cars can talk to each other, where it's V2V, vehicle to vehicle, or V2I, vehicle to infrastructure. And so we have the state of the art facility, a 540 acre dedicated space for those types of technologies, which is where the Advanced Mobility Group sets up shop and runs many tests, and we're still running to this day through COVID, thankfully.
So these cars haven't been SEMA modified yet, is what you're saying?
That's correct. These are not production models yet for the most part, but some of these models that'll come and are in production now are that level 2 system. So it's pushing the boundaries where it has sustained lateral and longitudinal control. So this is a vehicle that in some cases you might be able to even take your hands off the steering wheel. It's going to monitor you by maybe a driver camera. But these are systems that we're seeing on public roads and that we've definitely come across and run these full suite of tests at TRC.
So Alex, as you reach for level 3 and level 4, does that just compound the complexity in terms of what you could allow and not allow for
So you kind of broke up at the end there.
I'm sorry. Does it get more complex as you go to levels 3 or 4 for allowing any sort of modification or accounting for it, making sure that it complies?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the higher levels you the more levels you go, usually the more sensors you add. And so there's vehicles on the road right now that have 4 corner radars and a front facing. Some of these that we've tested here are simple forward facing camera, forward facing radar, and then maybe have 2 blind spot radars in the back. But the more cameras you add, the more radars. LiDARs is a new sensor we haven't even discussed today. But those vehicles, as you increase the levels of autonomy, they require that vision and that more of an omnidirectional view. So not just, Jake kind of mentioned it, if even just a window tint will have to recalibrate or at least check performance. Changing height, maybe just pitches in the front. So that's one sensor we have to calibrate, not even thinking about anything that happens in the rear. So the more sensors and the more complex these vehicles get, it's going to be harder to modify. But that's why we're starting the conversation early, and hopefully all the other members on this call, led by John and Seema, it's hopefully something we tackle very early in the process.
Yeah. Look, I think what you guys are doing and, is amazing, and having to come up with all this on your own, and hats off to Seema for even identifying this problem and bringing the industry together to be able to work on it. We're going to have to wrap this segment up right now. Really appreciate y'all coming on and bringing our audience up to speed with, simple modifications and how complicated it can be if you want to keep it all legal. And thank goodness you're doing just that. We should also mention that for all our viewers out there, we're going to have a link to the white paper on our YouTube post, so you can go and read everything more in depth of everything that Seema's put out on that. But guys, thanks again for your time.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Real good. And we're going to take a quick commercial break right now. We're going to give a shout out to our good friends at Borg Warner.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back talking all things automotive. Gary, who knew how complicated this could all be? Just amazing.
It's sort of mind-boggling. But if you're going to be paying big money for a vehicle that has been modified and you're going to have the factory warranty on it, I think you want all the things to work. So I understand that these guys are taking on a giant challenge, but I think that whole SEMA community is sort of a maker-oriented organization, and they're going to do it. They're going to get it done. But I thought it was interesting. He was talking, Alex, there at the end about doing the work on autonomous vehicles, and it's worth mentioning that earlier today, just like an hour or two ago, that Trevor Paul, who had been on the show 3 weeks ago, right, who is the mobility czar for the state of Michigan, made an announcement that Ford Motor Company and the state of Michigan and a variety of smaller organizations are getting together and looking at the feasibility of creating a corridor that will go from downtown Detroit to Ann Arbor, an automated, so connected and autonomous vehicles running that route. It's something that I don't think exists anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, not to my knowledge, certainly. And yeah, it was cool when we had Trevor on, and we were poking at him, saying, what's going to happen, and bang, here we are just a few weeks later, and a mega announcement.
Right, it was just huge. So Todd back.
I'm back.
So Todd, so what do you make of the connected corridor that the state of Michigan and Ford were talking about an hour or so ago?
It sounds really early. I was a little surprised that they're talking about, and this might have been Detroit Mayor Duggan mostly, but that they're talking about Michigan Avenue, a big wide boulevard that goes from Detroit through Dearborn and into Ann Arbor, rather than say take a lane or add a lane to maybe I-94, for example. So I thought that was interesting, and the possibility that might also include some other alternative transportation. I would think that if they, did some sort of light rail in addition to a smart street, that would reduce the number of lanes for cars if they're planning to add all that together, given what Bill Ford and Mayor Duggan spoke about.
Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting to me. So what do you think this says about the conventional or traditional auto industry?
The conventional traditional auto industry was going to change immensely as of the end of 2019. Now, half a year later, with everything that's happened, and I think we've talked about this. I've certainly talked about how you have potentially people who don't want to use public transportation, but in places like Manhattan and San Francisco, you don't want to buy a car either and add to the traffic, or even LA for that matter. So the whole transportation infrastructure, the ecosystem has got to change. I mean, the traffic in urban areas has been awful, and and then as far as connected cars, we don't care that much about the idea of letting a car drive itself. That's not what we do, although in many conditions that is what you want to do. But I think the auto industry is going to be shrinking to a certain extent in the next 5 to 10 years.
So last week's show, last Thursday, that evening, Cadillac introduced the Lyriq. It's electric crossover, which is to come to market in 2023. So I'm going to start with you, John. What do you think of that vehicle as a vehicle?
I like everything that they talked about it. I happen to like the styling. I know everybody's arguing about they should change this or that. I think they did a pretty good job on it. My only question is, why is General Motors hyping a car that's not going to be on sale for 2 years? They've got the all-new Suburban, the Tahoe, the Yukon, the Escalade. They're just hitting the market right now. I don't understand why GM isn't pouring all of its communication and marketing efforts into those vehicles, and instead it's talking about something that we can't get in or buy for another 2 years.
I think the answer to that, John, is Wall Street. And GM, for one thing, GM has had to change its schedule a bit in terms of introducing new vehicles. The GMC Hummer, which comes online, I think probably close to a year, well, maybe, 6 or 8 months ahead of time, ahead of the Cadillac Lyriq, or Lyriq, I want to call it Lyriq, will be shown, I think next month, certainly in the fall. And, there's been a lot of talk. The Lyriq and the GMC Hummer, the buzz has Wall Street looking at GM as, maybe being able to get the kind of investment or get the kind of at least something of a bump in stock price, after Tesla. Certainly nothing like the Tesla explosion in stock value, but get investment money. There's talk, a lot of speculation, mostly from Wall Street, on whether GM might or should spin off its Ultium battery electric cars into a separate entity. So I think it has a lot to do with raising money on Wall Street.
Yeah, what do you think, Gary?
Okay, so I agree with you, John, from the standpoint of I'm a little mystified as to why they're talking about something that's so far out in the future rather than something that we're going to have sooner than that. As far as the full size SUVs go, I mean, they don't need to talk about it. Those things are going to be just flowing out of dealerships as, you know, they're gonna come in the back and they're gonna go out the front, so that they don't need to promote those. I just don't see that happening. But, you know, to Todd's point about this idea of spinning things off. So last week on the show we had Mark Del Rosso, who is the CEO of Genesis, which 5 years ago was spun out of Hyundai to become Hyundai's premium brand. And now we've heard that Hyundai is going to be spinning off another brand, Ioniq, which will be its EV brand. So what do you guys make of that?
Well, you know, it must make GM pull its hair out, because here they've made a big deal that every new Cadillac is going to end in the letters IQ, like Lyriq, or they have another one, Celestiq. And here comes Hyundai with a whole brand that ends in IQ. And Hyundai stock jumped 10% on that announcement, and the market shrugged off GM's announcement about the Lyriq. And it just must drive General Motors batty when this happens.
I think they must be mystified, at the very least, of how other automakers are trying to become the GM of old, that instead of just being like Ford Motor Company, where you're mostly Fords, and of course they had Lincolns and Mercuries for a long time, but where you're mostly Ford, GM had all those divisions up until 2010, shed most of them, and now look at the brand lineup at Volkswagen Group, look at the combo, and I always forget that Stellantis, the
Yes.
name of the
Yeah, you got it.
Stellantis, the FCA and PSA Peugeot combo, and then Hyundai, which is a very new company compared with even Japanese automakers. It goes back to, I think, 1967 when they were doing knockdown Ford Cortinas. It's, you know, becoming a little bit more GM-like with 3 divisions only, and then the subsidiary affiliate, they own a portion of Kia. But you know, they're all trying to get to where GM was several years ago.
But is it a case that, I mean, I look at Genesis as being sort of a boutique brand rather than a mass brand, okay? And I think Cadillac wants to, you know, sell as many Cadillacs as it possibly can. Now, I'm sure that Genesis would like to sell a lot of cars, but, you know, you look at some of the things they're doing, you know, the way they have this service that you don't have to go to the dealer, they come to you. I mean, that doesn't scale very well if you have a mass market. And I just wonder with this Ioniq, and to be fair to Hyundai, I mean, Ioniq was the name of a model in the Hyundai lineup. So, right, you know, somebody at you know, Cadillac's naming company probably should have noticed that before they went to this whole IQ thing. But are they, you know, is Hyundai looking to make this a mass market brand or an electric boutique brand? Oh,
so many things I need to say. So conversely, Hummer used to be a GM division. Now it's become a GMC model. So we're kind of doing the reverse of Ioniq. A few things. Remember that Hyundai in 2008, when it introduced, pardon me, the Genesis as its luxury sedan, the original plan, and this was 2008, so we were going into the Great Recession, was to spin that off into a separate division. And then I think the other thing you need to look at is how Hyundai has always talked about how the Genesis brand will have 2 or 3 SUVs, I think 3 SUVs before too long, but they just happen to have the sedans ready first. And they need those SUVs to be able to spin off the dealerships into separate dealerships and have them be viable. So Hyundai, but if you look at the sales numbers in the US and you look at everything they've done with Genesis and what they do with other models, they are in it for the long term. Cadillac in the last 10 years has gone from Johann Danishan to, you know, who wanted to slowly rebuild the brand as a luxury brand and charge real luxury car money for it. Now they're, you know, you get a BMW 5 Series CT5 for BMW 3 Series money, and then CT3 is for BMW 2 Series coupe sedan money. So, they're willing to, and they've got the resources, they've got their own steel mills, they've got all this, their own shipping, everything, where they can do kind of a long-term development of its Cadillac, of Genesis, and now of Ioniq. GM is saying, "Oh, we're building all these electric vehicles coming in the next 3 to 5 years." Well, Hyundai's probably not selling a lot of Ioniqs yet, but they're willing to spin that off into a separate division and slowly build it. And they can do that because of its position mostly in South Korea, but also the way it operates here. They can afford to lose money. And one more example, I know I'm taking a lot of time, but yesterday, Hyundai unveiled its the new Elantra N line, and pointed out that it makes 206 horsepower. It's a pretty interesting looking car. I think pretty good looking car with the 6-speed manual, and it comes out at a time when Honda is killing off half of its manuals and only leaving them in the Civic Type R's and that sort of thing. I did the first drive of the Hyundai Venue. I think, were you on that, Gary?
No.
Anyway, of the Hyundai Venue early this year when people were still traveling. And the Venue is available with a manual only in the base model, which normally would be a rental car model, but you don't rent out manual gearboxes. And it's only available in that base model. And when I, figured out the percentages, the take rate, the number of cars, the number of Venues that would be sold with manuals, and that they have to spend $1 million or so to certify them in the U.S. with EPA, they're not making any money on that. They're going to sell a few thousand of those, and yet they're willing to keep selling them. So Hyundai has a different way of doing things, and I think they can because of their position in South Korea.
All right, so John, will General Motors spin off its EV company? Let's call it a company.
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is, it's EV company, if you will, represents the future of the company, represents the future of General Motors. And so you would spin it off for one reason and one reason only. You could do an IPO on it, and right now the stock market is going gaga over anything EV. Look at Tesla's and Nikola's value, and potentially even Fisker. But if you spun that off, what's left behind? I mean, it would decimate General Motors stock. If you look at, and I looked this up, Delphi, giant supplier, used to be part of General Motors. They spun off all their high-tech stuff and named it Aptiv. Aptiv is valued at the market at $22 billion. Delphi, its former parent, is now valued at $1.5 billion. I think the same thing would happen to General Motors. So what happens when you spin this off? I think you kill the stock of the mother company.
We have what they call an old GM. That's the term for it from the bankruptcy. We have a second old GM if that happened.
Yeah.
I agree with John.
Old Co, as they call
Old Co, yeah.
So John, you mentioned Nikola, and again, we had Trevor Milton on the show, 6 weeks ago. Yeah. And so this week they announced that they got an order for 2,500 garbage trucks, electric garbage trucks that will be based on its Tre Class 8 vehicle. And according to Trevor, this is the biggest sale of garbage trucks ever. Not electric garbage trucks ever. But I mean, so I make the point that, okay, is electric vehicle outside of Tesla, I mean, is the real market going to be commercial vehicles rather than being consumer products?
Before John answers, I want to know who keeps track of what the biggest garbage truck sales are. Where
Yeah.
do the numbers come
This is
from?
why people tune into Autoline After Hours
Yeah.
to know who sells
Because of-
more garbage trucks.
Dr. Data, yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. I should have looked at that.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Commercial versus consumer?
I think it's going to be both. Though I believe that, let's talk two segments for heavy trucks. Long haul across the country, boy, I'm not sure if that's really going to go electric. You gotta
Hydrogen.
maybe hydrogen, and that's what Trevor Milton's trying to sell with Nikola, right? But if you do it pure battery electric, yowza! I mean, you've got to have so many batteries and add so much weight that takes away from your carrying capacity as a truck that I'm not sure that that is going to pencil very well. On the other hand, if you talk short haul, garbage trucks being the perfect example of it, yeah, I see a bright future for electric trucks, particularly like garbage trucks, those that go through neighborhoods. And we've all had the garbage truck come through our neighborhood. Man, are they loud. They're so noisy. And so to turn them into electric is a perfect application, I would think. And for short haul trucks that are going out, doing a route, coming back to the same yard every night, yeah, I think electric makes all the sense in the world for that once all the battery costs come down.
And delivery trucks, delivery vans, especially with what's happened with the pandemic since March. And just the other day, Amazon announced it's taking over a building or several of the buildings on the Michigan State Fairgrounds, which is just on the north end of the city of Detroit. And I could see the Amazon trucks just rolling in and rolling out every few hours and changing the batteries out or changing out for different trucks with charged batteries.
So these would be the Amazon Rivian trucks, right?
Presumably, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Gary, did you see, speaking of Nikola, there was a report out today, I think it was in Reuters, that he's made 2 proposals to Hyundai. He really wants to partner with Hyundai. And if you remember when we had him on After Hours, he was singing the praises of Hyundai, saying only good things about him. And of course, one reason being that Hyundai is committed to hydrogen. South Korea is committed to hydrogen, probably more than any other country. But it came out that Hyundai is not interested in doing business with them because they potentially see Nikola as a threat to their own heavy truck business.
That's their next division, probably. I mean, well, I guess it's already a division, but Ionic trucks, right?
So speaking of Hyundai, and you mentioned Aptiv before. So now these guys have gotten together and created a company called Motional. I think that's right. And they're going to develop and commercialize SAE Level 4 vehicles. And they're talking about having this technology ready for robo-taxi providers and fleet operators in 2022. So Todd, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's obviously we're talking about like geofence type of level 4, I guess. I think that sort of thing is level 4, and robo taxis, that sort of thing, have been discussed in the last 2 or 3 years. You've had Elon Musk making big claims for what Tesla was going to do and didn't come to fruition, but that doesn't mean that work has stopped while everybody's working from home. And I would not be surprised to see some small application of that, given what's already happened with some autonomy, some level 4 autonomy in certain safe areas, I guess. I think I just left you.
You broke up a bit there, but yeah, I think we got the point. Yeah.
Okay.
So John, you mentioned in passing Fisker as well. So Fisker apparently is trying to get Magnus Steyr to build the Fisker Ocean. So I say to you, okay, even if this happens, is Fisker going to be a real company, or is this just sort of a they're going to do one of those, what is it, SPAC or
Yeah.
Spark or
Yeah, SPAC. No, you got that right. Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation or Company, a reverse merger. He's doing that to raise money. I don't know if Fisker is going to survive with his reincarnation of a company. He failed the last time around. Of course, his timing was horrific. He was launching just as the Great Recession was breaking out. But he did it with a car that, while beautiful, mechanically, based on owners who have told me I never really drove the car, it wasn't all that well put together. But what I do like about Fisker's approach is he's doing something different than everybody else. You mentioned, looks like he's trying to get Magna to do the final assembly of the car. He's talking to Volkswagen about using their MEB electric vehicle architecture for it. And what I like about this is he's doing the exact opposite of Elon Musk at Tesla, Elon has made his company very vertically integrated. I mean, Tesla makes more things in-house than any other company in the world. It's almost the old Henry Ford Rouge plant model where raw materials go in one end and finished cars come out the other. So what Fisker is doing is saying, no, I'm not going to do all that. That's very capital intensive. I'm going to outsource everything. And really, when you think about it, the only thing that Fisker has to do is three things: set the specs, do the design, and control the customer experience. Other than that, everything can be outsourced. And I'm not saying that it's going to work. All I'm saying is what I like is his strategy, because anybody who tries to copy Elon Musk, and there's handfuls and handfuls of companies trying to do that, is just going to beat their head against the wall. You're not going to out Elon. So I don't know if he'll pull it off, but I really like Fisker's strategy.
So no assets, zero assets.
Why? You don't need them.
It's like the computer industry, the laptop industry, or bicycles. You're a bicycle manufacturer, but you don't manufacture a bicycle. You have it built in a giant brand plant in Taiwan and sent over with Shimano components, or you have your Apple computer built by Foxconn. It's kind of, to John's point, it's very funny that Tesla is doing the exact opposite, is doing the Henry Ford model, and now Fisker is coming along and saying, well, let me do what Apple or what Trek does,
And think about it, in Henry Ford's day, when he was building the Rouge plant, Ford Motor Company had over 50% market share in the world. There wasn't a supplier who could have greater economy of scale than the Ford Motor Company. Fast forward to today, and tier ones are mega corporations, multinational, extremely technically competent, pour all kinds of R&D into it. Suppliers today in their commodity lines have far more economies of scale than any automaker. Maybe there's some commodities where an automaker is ahead, but generally not. So I think Fisker's got a shot at making his next effort pay off simply because he's doing a different strategy and not trying to just copy what everybody else has done.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I also agree with John in that I'm not certain that Fisker has the ability to pull that model off as well as maybe some other potential manufacturers are. But given the past, for example, and given what you said about his car, I remember when I was at Motor Trend, we had one on Car of the Year, and I think it was the same year as the Tesla Model S and the Fisker. We were testing at the Hyundai Proving Ground in California, and I don't think the Fisker made it more than a lap and a half.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. It comes back to Hyundai again. They seem to be everywhere,
Well, and again, it's a different. I mean, I was talking about their position in South Korea, and of course, they have, like Japan, they have. They call them Keiretsu in Japan. They're Shaibol in South Korea. Hyundai is a fairly modern company, and they're into everything. And they buy their own steel, and they've even admitted at some press conferences that there are that by having something like that old Henry Ford model, they're saving money on something like steel and some other components. But they, unlike Ford, they don't do everything themselves. They certainly rely on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers.
You know, we've talked about General Motors, and there was an interesting departure this week from the executive ranks. Divya Suryadevara left General Motors as, you know, the first woman who had been their chief financial officer, and she's going to some refer to as a unicorn, a startup company in San Francisco that is basically internet payment. And so I just wonder, you know, maybe this gets back to this whole issue of, you know, not having to worry about, tangible physical things. You know, here's this woman who has, you know, she dealt with the strike, she dealt with the pandemic. I mean, she's been dealing with all sorts of physical things, and now is deciding perhaps there's a brighter future for her if she goes west. What do you guys think about that? Is this a big loss for General Motors, and does this indicate that maybe the auto companies are not as attractive as they might be?
Well, first of all, do we know, is she going to be a CFO or maybe CEO at this new company? So it would be
CFO. She's not CEO.
She's not going to be CEO of the new company. But unlike a company like GM, I mean, Silicon Valley it's come under a lot of criticism for the lack of prominent women executives in the business. The other point I think I'd like to make is what segment of the new internet economy did Elon Musk get his start with? He started PayPal, right?
PayPal,
He was
yeah.
one of the founders of PayPal, and it sounds like this is a similar kind of company.
What do you think, John?
I think it is a loss for GM to lose her. I mean, when you look at the GM's financial performance, especially this year with the devastation of the COVID pandemic, and they almost broke even in the second quarter, even though their plants were shut down completely for at least half the quarter, is really impressive. And I believe that she was the real mastermind behind GM's restructuring. I don't know. I don't sit at the board table, but GM and Mary Barra clearly gets a lot of the credit for this too. But they put together a restructuring plan and launched it when times were booming. And everybody went, what are they doing? You know, they pulled out of Europe. They pulled out of a whole bunch of countries all over the world. And they started implementing all kinds of headcount reduction, and you know, no one took them seriously. Well, now we see the results of that. And I think Divya played a major role in accomplishing it. So yes, I do think it's a loss for GM. And I believe the reason that she probably went is you can make a lot more money in Silicon Valley with a startup than you're ever going to make as a GM officer. I think she made $6.6 million last year.
Isn't GM Generous Motors anymore?
Well, you know, I could live relatively comfortably on $6.6 million a year, Todd, but you know, she can, and probably going to make a lot more money out on the coast. And who knows, they might have already said to her, Divya, you come over here, you play around as CFO for a couple of years, then we're going to make you CEO. And she probably looked at the succession rate at General Motors and may have concluded, you know, I'd like to run a company. Mary's not going anywhere. Mary's going to be around for at least another 5 years. So if I'm going to have any shot, and I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but I imagine she may have been presented with a career path that would put her as CEO of this company in a couple of years.
Well, you know, to the point of rising through the ranks, apparently Barry Engel, who had been the president of General Motors North America, left last month because he wanted to be a CEO somewhere. So, I mean, things may be good at General Motors, but maybe not so good. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But speaking of places where there are perhaps not so good situations, so today Daimler settled with the U.S. authorities on various and sundry suits being brought against the 250,000 diesel passenger cars and vans in the United States. And these numbers look pretty stunning to me. So they expect costs of approximately $1.5 billion to settle with the U.S. authorities. They estimate the cost of the class action settlement to be approximately $700 million. And they estimate further expenses of a mid three-digit million amount to fill the rest of the settlements. Is this a real kick in the gut to these guys?
Well, not as
it's
big
not-
a kick in the gut as Volkswagen got
Yeah,
it. The 30
It's
billion
not VW
loss.
diesel money, right? It's not VW diesel money, but it's just so. For those of us who went on some German automaker programs 15 or 18 years ago, and had all kinds of engineers and executives asking, "So, do you think we could sell a diesel in the United States?" It looked a lot better then than it does now, and I think I'm one of the people who's come around to believe that diesels are not a good thing, and it's not the way to go, no matter who you are, and going forward. And so, if this helps get Mercedes-Benz out of the diesel business, including semi trucks, and they could be one of the first to go to fuel cells replacing diesels in semis. I think that would be a good thing. So, it's not a huge amount for a company like Daimler, but I think it'll make a good point on what the future is, and it's not diesels.
Yeah, to me, I hadn't heard the news, Gary, so thanks for bringing it up. To me, it's very disappointing, though. The only reason that they're getting slapped with these fines is because they knew they were cheating. It's one thing if the EPA comes to you and goes, "Hey, guys, look at this," and you go, "Oh, no, how did that slip through?" Oh, and you get some fines, and, it's taken care of. They knew these vehicles did not meet the standards. That's why you're talking the kind of money they did. Now, the reason that Volkswagen got slapped with so much more of a fine was because they lied about the whole thing. They denied the whole thing. They fought the EPA every step of the way. And when the Justice Department sees you do that, they chop your head off. If they catch you and you go, "Yeah, okay, it was bad. We shouldn't have done it." Boom. Okay, you get a fine, and that's that, which is kind of what happened in the Mercedes situation versus the Volkswagen situation, where they lied and cheated and denied the whole way until they couldn't do it any longer.
Well,
but I'm very disappointed to see that Mercedes got caught on this.
And the way Volkswagen did it, remember, was that the top executives were all denying that they knew anything about what the lower level. They were trying to brush that off on on someone, far below the C-suite who did the fiddling, and that came back to bite them in a big way.
Yeah.
All right, so to wrap this whole thing up, so I want to ask you guys a question. Okay, so we can't ignore what's going on in the outside world and the pandemic, and so I ask you guys, how is the comeback looking for the auto industry? Do you think that the auto industry? I mean, we saw a lot of demand was just came back right away. So is auto going to have a V-shaped recovery, or is it going to be sort of V-shape and then trend downward to some odd shape, whatever that would be, hump? What do you think, Todd?
I think you have to look at what could possibly happen in the economy after we get out of the pandemic. And I'd say just the way the U.S. is handling it compared with, say, China, of course, or even parts of Europe, I think we're going to have a rough time of it. I think the recovery in the auto industry was aided by the fact that brand new cars are expensive. We talked about this before. They sell to people now, if you buy a brand new car, you're probably more upper middle income than middle income. And so I think a lot of the upper middle income people in the US were the ones who were working from home but not getting laid off, obviously, because you're not going to buy a car if you got laid off or fired. And so how we come out of this in 6 months or a year will determine a lot of what happens to the industry. But I think in any event, we're due for maybe several years of a 15 million unit ceiling, which is still a pretty good number. What's the basement on that? I don't know, but I'd say no more than 15 million.
Yeah, I would say the V-shaped already happened, Gary. We saw a big plunge and then we saw a snap back, but it didn't snap back to where it was before. It snapped back to where it's going to plateau at right now. And I hope we get to 15 million. I'm not optimistic. A lot of the snapback happened. There was a lot of bailout money. Some call it stimulus money. It doesn't look like we're getting a second round of that, or it's going to be far, far less than the first round. And so I think the industry's in for tough times ahead. They borrowed a ton of money to get them through this, money that's going to have to be paid off. And it's going to be harder to do at lower volumes. Remember Alex Partners a couple of months ago came out with various scenarios, worst case, best case. Their worst case scenario was the industry doesn't fully recover until 2025. I'm increasingly starting to think that's going to be the case.
When I talk about 5 years and 15 being the ceiling, I mean over 5 years. I don't see 15 for the next couple. And on top of whatever happens to demand, we also have a supply problem. It's bad enough to have a supply problem when demand is good, but if you have a supply problem when demand is not very good, when it's bad, because to John's point, it really took a dive and then it came back up, but only relative to that initial dive. Yeah, you're in trouble. And that's where I think there's potentially a global shakeout among all the brands and even maybe some of the manufacturers that we have.
Well, on a more positive note, I just want to end by saying that Lincoln has partnered with the Calm app. So when you're in your vehicle, you can feel more calm. So just, we just don't want all this agitation. And I believe Mercedes is doing something similar.
Mercedes S-Class, I have to look up the word because they have a warmth and comfort package coming in the new 2021 Mercedes S-Class. Big emphasis on the interior, of course. And that warmth and comfort package includes something called an energizing coach. And I asked in a roundtable with, the product chief, Lars Wiemeyer, what does that mean? Does it determine that if you need to do some exercise that you run in place while you're driving? And he said, I didn't quite put it that way, but he said, well, you can roll your shoulders and still drive safely. So you're going to get that sort of thing. Cocooning in a car, none of this was intended because the S-Class the design sign-off was done last year. But it's kind of showing up as being a way to get out of your house without seeing other people in these rough times of pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So Mercedes and Lincoln are both doing things to make us feel better. So I think that's a good thing to end on.
That is a good thing to end on.
Right. It is a slightly more upbeat note to end the show. Real good. Hey, Todd, great seeing you out there in Maryland. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, John. Glad to do it.
Yeah.
Good.
Gary, thank you.
Sure.
Take care, Gary. See
All right.
you next week.
Do it again.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.